Let's start this with a little story. Back when I started making games more seriously in 2023, 2022, I heard from various places that you should focus on a single genre of game, and that the genre that you pick for your first game is going to be the one that you focus on. I didn't think too much about that at the time I heard it, and I kind of just tossed it into the vault of different opinions I've heard in different places, but I did find it come up a little bit later in life when I was making Trace Hunters, and I was thinking, oh, am I going to be stuck making a vehicle combat game for the rest of my life? And of course, the answer to that is no. That may be controversial, maybe, but I don't think it is. I wanted to make a video to talk about this in case any of you all are making games and you're thinking this genre that I picked for my first game is going to be the genre that I'm locked into. Just to get to the topic of the video up front here, possibly with a hot take opinion, I don't think that's true. I don't think the first game that you make determines all games you're going to make for the rest of time and you're stuck in that genre. I also don't necessarily think you should focus on a single genre. What do I think you, as possibly a new game dev, should do? And that's to make a game in a genre that you are familiar with. Most likely you're also a gamer, or you have been in the past, you've played games, so you know something about that genre already. You know what you enjoy about that genre and what you don't enjoy about that genre, so you can use that as transfer knowledge as you go in to build games. And I think that's a great thing to do. Now, I again stick to my original opinion to keep it short, keep that dev time short, so that you can get that game out there and you can learn from the full dev cycle. So maybe you don't go make an MMO right out of the gate. If you happen to have spent 1,200 hours playing World of Warcraft, try to pick another genre that you like that you can ship in a shorter amount of time. To talk a little bit more about what I'm going to call the genre lock-in fear, let's think about Paradox Games. You probably know who Paradox is. They make 4X simulation games for the most part, like Hearts of Iron 1 through 4, and Victoria, and Crusader Kings, and a bunch of other similar games like that. And let me tell you, regardless of your opinion on how they sell their games and the kinds of games they make, they are damn good at making those games, and they've been doing it for a long time. They've built up a strong base there. What do you think would happen if Paradox just for some reason decided they're going to launch an FPS? Well, most likely what I would do is I would see the game as a player. I wouldn't care who made it, and I would decide if I wanted to play it or not. And it didn't matter to me if they had made 10 4X games before that. Now, Paradox is huge, and a lot of huge studios start acting as publishers after they get to that point, and Paradox is publishing for an FPS game called Vampires the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, which I'm really looking forward to, because I liked the first one. Even with people like Paradox who are well known in a genre, I don't think it would matter that much if they were to go make an FPS game. I don't think it would count against them that this studio that made a ton of 4X games started making an FPS. I think players would just be like, yo, that looks like a cool game, I'll play that. Okay, so let's get into a little bit more meat about this topic of should you make games in only one genre. We'll take this as a little pro-con. I've already talked in the beginning of the video on my opinions about getting locked into a genre, so let's switch gears and talk about pros of making a game in a single genre, because I think there are some really compelling pros there. The first of those is something that I've talked about in previous videos, and that's that you build up this framework of tools and frameworks of mechanics, and frameworks are putting those mechanics together into what I call a system. Maybe that's a common term, maybe it's not. And the more of these frameworks or tools or modules or whatever you want to call them you have together, the faster you can put together a game in that genre, and that's probably a good thing, especially if that genre is working pretty hot. It helps you build games more quickly, it helps you go in and change things with the rules of how you've done something before without having to rewrite a bunch of other stuff. So I think that's a pretty big compelling reason to try to focus on a certain genre or maybe a certain type of mechanic. I think it also gives you an opportunity to capitalize on your strengths. If you go and you want to make like a visual novel but you have no background in art, you're not necessarily capitalizing on your strengths very well, in my opinion at least, because you're not a very good artist yet. You haven't practiced art enough to get to that point for you to capitalize on your strength as an artist when you may be a rock star programmer and you can write code like no one else, because there's not a whole lot of code you're going to have to write to make that happen. In fact, if you really wanted to, you could just use RenPy. Another reason to focus on a genre, and this one is just as valid as the other two reasons that I mentioned, is you just like it. You're just really into that genre for some reason. And if that's the case, then cool, focus on that genre. You do you, bro. You may or may not have difficulty making money there, depending on what the market's doing, but who knows? If you get really, really good at it, you probably could sell something there. All right, shifting gears into the cons of focusing focusing on a single genre. These are a little different than the ones I've talked about before, so I think they're worth mentioning. And I'll make them a little bit more personal so you can think about it that way too. In my opinion, especially when you're starting out doing something, whether it's making a game, making an app in a new field, you don't really know what you want to make yet. You don't really know what it is that idea that you've got is going to turn into, and you don't find out until you start making it, until you start doing it. For example, you may think you really want to make an FPS. What you may discover as you're making an FPS is that you actually really hate it. You actually really hate parts of making that kind of game, and that sucks a lot. For example, you're going in and you want to focus on the shooting mechanics of the game, but then you find out you have to do set design because you have to manually build all the levels that you're focusing on, and that kind of sucks a lot. It's not very fun, in my opinion, to go in and just rotate rocks all over the place. It is oddly relaxing, but at the same time, maybe you decide you really don't like that. So it doesn't really make sense to focus on that genre. Another reason why you might not want to focus on a single genre is you are not very resilient to shifts in the market. So players may like a certain kind of game, they may really be into a specific genre, say RTS or something like that. And then over time, RTS become less and less popular as games, and they have more and more difficulty to sell. That's actually a real example that actually happened. RTS games used to be really popular back in the late 90s. I remember playing a bunch of them. I love playing RTS games. I thought I was really good at StarCraft. And if you look at today, making an RTS is really difficult, and they aren't selling very well. I'll try to show something from Gamealytic up here so that you can see roughly where that's going, but overall, RTS is a more difficult genre to sell in today than it was in the 90s because the market has changed. There are still dedicated RTS fans that will probably want to play your game. I'm probably one of those dedicated fans, and someday I will make an RTS game, so maybe use this video as a way to hold me to that. If RTS wasn't a convincing example, let's think about 2D platformers. Everybody loves to make a 2D platformer when they first go out of the gate for some reason. And 10 years ago, 2D platformers worked pretty well. If you think about 10 years back, that's a couple years before Hollow Knight released. Hollow Knight did really well, and I think after Hollow Knight did so well, people wanted to make more 2D platformers. And then there's a bunch of 2D platformers, and today it's really hard, even for studios that have awesome art, and they've been making that kind of game for a long time, to sell 2D platformers, except for maybe Silksong if it ever releases. Just to balance things out, a third reason why focusing on a single genre may not be the best idea is that you don't get to diversify. And that gets back to that second point a little bit, where if the market changes and you've only focused on a single type of thing, you may have difficulty adapting to that new market. I do think that not focusing on a single genre really helps you build competency as a game dev and improve and get better so that you can make better and better games. Some games aren't really heavy on animation, for example, and you're not going to build up your animation skills necessarily or your knowledge about animation unless you go into one of those and you start making a lot of things with a lot of animation heavy work. So that's another reason why I don't think it's a great call to only focus on one genre. Hopefully you liked the video today. Hopefully this helps you get over that fear of getting locked into a certain genre if you have that. And it's also been generally useful for you as you think about how you're going to go forward with your game dev journey. My name's Kyle. I make videos like this 2 times per week right here on the channel, so make sure to hit that subscribe and like button. I also have a newsletter that I'll link in the description, but for now, I'll see you all next time.